There's a very specific kind of afternoon when it's raining, you're at home, and there's nothing that urgently needs to be done. And for a few hours, the world feels quiet. And I think the books you choose to read at that particular time matter more than we realize. Rainy afternoons and reading are almost inseparable. It is cliche, but it's very true that there's something about inclement weather that makes you want to curl up with a book and just while away the hours. But I don't think it's just the desire to read that matters. I think the kind of book that you choose also matters and can change the entire experience. Because not every book fits this kind of afternoon. And for me, the books that I find myself drawn to at this particular time would be books that are not overly dramatic or heavy in plot. They don't demand a lot from you, and instead they really slow you down. These kind of books draw your attention to the small things, a place or a landscape or a passing thought, and the right book can create a real sense of solitude, but will also leave place for you to do your own thinking. These are the kind of books that don't compete with this kind of afternoon, but they move with the same pace as it. And I have a selection of those kind of books that I want to share with you today. Books that are perfect for a rainy afternoon, because we don't always notice how the choice of our books can change how an afternoon will feel at the end of the day. One book that I think captured this feeling really, really well is Clear by Carys Davies. This was published in 2024 and is a very small, very sparse novel, character-driven, set in a very remote landscape, and on the surface, not a lot seems to happen. But there is such a strong sense of isolation and landscape, and the attention to that place that really draws you in. It is perhaps the most dramatic book I have in this selection of books I'm sharing with you, but it's not dramatic at all. It is very quiet and contained in that drama. And I do think it is the kind of book that encourages you to slow down as you read it, not because it is difficult, but because of how restrained it is. There are less than a handful of characters in this book, but it seamlessly merges his true history with fiction, as it tells the story of a minister who is dispatched during the clearances in Scotland to a remote island off the coast of Scotland to clear it of its inhabitants, which is actually only one man who has been there on his own for decades. And I think part of the reason why this book fits this kind of afternoon well is it's not one that is driven by plot, but instead it lets you settle into the story in the same way that I feel I settle in when a rainy afternoon comes along. I personally felt that it was quite unpredictable, but it was a very moving book and I was surprised by the ending. And it's one of those books that kind of changes as you think about it more often. And I think when I reread it over and over, I'll probably come away with very different feelings each time. And that's one of the things I really love the most about quiet books. They don't always reveal themselves immediately. Sometimes they stay with you in a softer way, and you find yourself thinking about them again and again long after you've read it. Another book that I think carries similar feelings with it, but in a very different way, is Antarctica by Keegan. This is actually a collection of short stories. There are 16 in total, and they are quite dark and reflective. Each story feels so contained that it is very easy to get lost within them individually, like a very small, quiet moment you step into for a while. Most of the stories centre around ordinary people generally in rural Ireland, often at times when there is nothing really happening to them or with them in their lives, but there is something that we see as the reader as a real undercurrent, something shifting beneath the surface. Across the collection of these stories, there is the entire gamut of human emotion, from grief to isolation to love and loss, but all of it is handled with the unique restraint and constraint that Keegan is so good at. She is our short story queen. There is no excess in her writing, not one word is wasted in her writing. Everything is very precise and restrained, but because of that, I think you end up noticing things that you might miss in a longer novel. Short stories work exceptionally well for a rainy afternoon where you can just jump in and read one or two stories, or you could sit down and read the entire book. It doesn't rush you, it doesn't ask too much of you. It just allows you to stay in that slower, quiet rhythm and to kind of go at your own pace and stop whenever you're ready. And there's something really nice to not having to commit to a whole book in one sitting. Sometimes just one story is enough to leave you thinking about it for the rest of the day, and the title story, the first story in this collection, which is called Antarctica, will most definitely do that. I think my other favourite one was one called Sisters, Men and Women, Burns, and Love in the Tall Grass. There was quite a few that were favourites, but it's a beautiful collection. A book that feels a little bit warmer is 84 Charing Cross Road by Helene Hanff. This is one of my personal favourite books to read on a rainy afternoon. It's an epistolary novel which is set in the form of letters, which again makes it very similar to a short story collection where you can dip in and jump back out and just read a few letters at a time. But be warned, once you do start this book, you will probably want to stay in it and see it through to its end. 84 Charing Cross Road starts with Helene Hanff writing to a London bookseller looking for a particular book, and their relationship begins as they go back and forth in letters. She is being sent books and asking for other books, and her relationship with the bookseller grows along with other people that are also in the bookseller's world. The correspondence continues for over 20 years. And there is something so lovely and intimate about watching these relationships form over those years. My edition is from Slightly Foxed in the UK, which also has the second book, the follow-up to 84 Charing Cross Road, which is The Duchess of Bloomsbury, which again, if you read the first book, you'll want to continue on to the next one. It's very funny, very charming, heartwarming. The humour and the wit just jump off the page. But underneath that is something very quiet and something really nostalgic for a time that once was, which was the post-war years. And I think that's why it works so well on a rainy afternoon like this. It has a real stillness and comfort to it with that nostalgia. There's just something especially comforting about books like Charing Cross Road on days like this. Not because they are cozy in an obvious way, but because they do remind you that reading can feel like company as well. Moving into something a little different, some books don't actually have to be plot-driven or stories at all. They're more about paying attention, whether it is to a place or to a season or to small everyday details. And for that reason, I would recommend Notes from Walnut Tree Farm by Roger Deakin. It is a reflective nature memoir that is formed by a collection of writings of Roger Deakin's last 6 years before he passed away, all about his life around his home at Walnut Tree Farm. He writes about the changing seasons, the weather, the birds, the nature around him, just the really small details that we often miss as we go through life, and his observations of his changing environment. There's no real narrative to this book, so you literally could pick it up at any page and just spend a little bit of time in here, read a few pages and see what he notices. And I think it's really important to read different forms of books, and this one is really great for a rainy afternoon because you don't have to give a long commitment. You can just pick it up and read a page. Dip in and out, look out the window, watch the rain falling, and then come back to it again. And I think it really is books like this that start to change how you read and interpret other things. They really make you notice more even after you've put them down. And looking at this list now of books that I have together, the majority of them are actually from a rural setting in the UK. And I think that just speaks to the kind of atmosphere and nostalgia that I'm looking for on a rainy afternoon. And if you want something that sits kind of in between observations like Roger Deakin's and an actual story, then I would definitely recommend Raising Hare by Chloe Dalton. This memoir opens as Chloe has removed herself from London during a lockdown or isolation period during the COVID pandemic. And she's removed herself to a quiet rural cottage, and on one walk one afternoon she finds a baby hare, a leveret, and she decides to bring that back home to try and recuperate it, to rehabilitate it, to allow it to go back into the wild. As Chloe begins caring for this hare, you see their relationship start to develop, and it's interesting because she is deliberately avoiding too much contact, physical contact with this animal, because the more you engage with it, the less chance is that it will be able to be released back into the wild. So it's a really difficult dance that you're watching between the two of them. But ultimately, I think this book is a lot less about events that happen and a lot about attention. Attention to the animal, attention to the rhythms of the natural world, and to small changes over time. There is something really absorbing about it in a very quiet way, and when I first read this book, I wasn't 100% sold on it, but the more time I thought about it after, the more I began to appreciate what this book was. It's one of those books that doesn't rush, it doesn't try and hold your attention through plot devices. It builds on this sense of closeness that Chloe is experiencing, almost like you're watching something unfold slowly over time. And it makes it perfect for one of those rainy afternoons where you have the time to give a lot of attention to something, to really notice what you're reading rather than just move through it. By this point in the afternoon, I often want something a little bit different, something that feels a little deeper. Not necessarily dramatic, but a story from start to finish that really stays with you. And there are books that just feel quiet and contained, and there are books that feel a little more expansive. And Train Dreams by Denis Johnson is one of those books. It is a very short novel. I'm actually in the middle of reading it right now, and I've only read it for less than an hour. There's only 116 pages in this book, but it is tiny, but it still feels really expansive. It contains a whole life in this book. It's told in a way that is very simple and yet quite affecting, as it follows an ordinary man living in the American West, and through a series of small moments and definitely in his losses, you watch his entire life unfold. There is a real stillness to it. There is a real sense of going back in time in this book. And I think that is part of why it makes it a really powerful choice for a rainy afternoon when you have the time to spend a solid hour reading. You can read it in one sitting, but it does not feel small. And finally, something a little bit different, not a book in the usual sense, but an author I came to because of your recommendations, and that is The Peace of Wild Things by Wendell Berry. This is a book of poems, and I've slowly been making my way through it, but this particular collection takes its title from one of the poems in the book, which is The Peace of Wild Things. And I do feel that I'm returning to it, especially on a rainy afternoon like this. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. This particular book is a collection of poems that are deeply anchored in nature and the world around us. There are meditations on love and death and memory. I've heard it described as hymns to the land, and I do think it is that. It captures that feeling of stepping away, of untethering yourself from the world that we currently know today, from the noise, from the urgency, from everything that feels quite overwhelming, and settling into something much simpler. And ultimately, that is what this kind of afternoon is really about. It's not about escaping, but really allowing yourself to be still for a while. Some of my favorite reading experiences haven't always been those big tome-sized books. They've been quiet afternoons like this. When the falling of the rain, which we don't get a lot of rain, so when it happens, I embrace it. But that falling of the rain makes you feel like you have the permission to stop and slow down and just withdraw for a while. But over time, I've realized it's not whether you have read or not in that moment, but it's how you read and what you chose to read in those moments. Because the books that you pick up don't just fill time, they shape your world. They change the kind of day that you have. And perhaps that's why these sort of afternoons really stay with us. Not because anything extraordinary happened, but because for a while, everything slowed down. The rain, the room you're in, the book in your hands, they all moved at the same quiet pace for just a moment. And sometimes I think those kind of reading days are the ones that we really remember the most. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you have a rainy afternoon of reading ahead of you, I am very jealous, and I hope you find something that fits that moment for you. Have a wonderful week of reading ahead, and I will speak with you soon. Bye.